Hello and welcome back. All right, in this video, we're going to talk about Power Query, how to pull your data in, and how to do a little bit of the transforming the data as necessary. I'm also going to do a short little tutorial on VLookups and how to utilize them. And what that allow us to do is build onto any of our data that we pull. There are a couple of benefits of doing this. One, I do this in Excel because Excel is fairly user friendly. Most people know how to use Excel at this point, whereas most people either don't have access to Power Query or they're not familiar with Access databases and how to edit information in there. So to keep it simple, I would highly recommend keeping Excel available. Additionally, you can do a VLookup in Power Query, or sorry, a VLookup in Power BI very easily. But the difference is sometimes you want the quick, easy information. I would highly recommend doing it in Power BI, and I'll show you that eventually. But for many of the tools, if you want a quick, easy way to put this into usable formats, VLOOKUPs are a good way to do that. So I'm going to first share my screen and show you. This is the AFAOC's status of funds that I've pulled, and you can see it's all written in finance code. It gives us our amounts, what's been paid, again, the last 5 years of data. So we can look at that and kind of have a good idea of what's going on and where things are at. But that's all written in finance code, and unless you want to get into a bunch of filters and drop downs and adding things up manually, pivot tables are the way to go. However, I would not put this directly in a pivot table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a brand new spreadsheet, and I'm going to use Power Query to pull that data into a separate workbook. By doing this, you're creating a link between your data and your formatted workbook. The benefit of this is that you will be able to update your background data. You'll be able to save over it every day, and then all you have to do is go back to your workbook that's been put into pivot tables and just hit update. So let me first show you how to pull it in. So we're going to go to queries and connections, and then we're going to get data. Now, the one thing you have to keep in mind is the data you're looking at already in a workbook, or is it in a CSV file? All of our PBAS reports are in CSV files. All of our AFAOC data is in Excel workbooks. So for this one, I'm going to open up Excel workbook. And first thing it's going to do is open up a window and ask me, where am I pulling the data from? So once we do that, we'll be able to go to that data file, select the set of workbooks that we want, just one. But in this case, I'm going to go to a separate data file, one that I have for 22nd Air Force, and I'm going to go to the status of funds, and I'm going to import it. This Power Query works the same way in Excel as it does in Power BI. So it's nice that you can kind of take a moment and utilize both of them. But in Power BI, you have a lot more options as far as connecting data goes in your data model. All right, so the first thing it's going to do is say, okay, you found the file. Which one do you want? Do you want the export details? These are tabs that I have on there, but I already have a table in there. So I'm just going to select the table because that is the data table that we want. And look, it comes in the way we want to. You can click load and it'll immediately post it into your data file, or you can click transform data. I would recommend making a habit of always clicking transform data, because then it's going to show you that data. And then if you need to edit it or change information coming out of it, it gives you an opportunity to do that now. depending on the system you're using, PBAS in particular likes to add in information that's not necessary. For example, they use equal and quotation marks randomly input into their data. I assume that this is a coding issue, but it's easier to fix here than it is to get your data and then piece by piece kind of look at it. All right, so this is your Power Query editor. If you notice on your right, you've got applied steps already. That's already got a table name. This is your opportunity to change the table name. So I'm just going to put NAF AFAOC status of funds. All right. So what information has already been pulled in? It's our file. So if you come back to these, you can look at your source file, your navigation, and change data type. Now what that's going to do is it's going to show you up here your data type information. But your source, if you want to edit it, you just hit this little cog and it pops up with you can see where it pulled the file in and the data names. So that's where if you have two files with similar data, see here, you can pull in a different file name. So for example, for the daily audits, I have one template that I used and I save over my daily audits either by day or by month, or if I'm doing research, then I will pull in those selected transaction histories, um, which is what the report's actually called. I will pull that into my daily audit format workbook, and all I need to do is change the file path. And so you just click browse and it'll open up a file path for you to go look at again. Navigation, again, you can hit this little cog and it will bring up that same thing. Brings up navigation because it's looking at that file, asking you which set of files you want. Again, I'm going to hit cancel, and then it goes to change data type. Now, what Power Query has already done, and you can see it's already changed fund into a text. It's changed fund main into 64 integer type. You can see that here. The little ABC is a text. This is integer type. So there are some pros and cons to that. If it's a number here, that means it can be summed. If it's got ABC, then it's a text type. And if you see this little red X, that means that there's an error. And more than likely, that's because we have some either missing types, or you have some stuff in there that should have an X. So one way to fix that is you can change it to text. I'm just going to add that as a new step of change type. So if you notice that it went away, I'll pop back up. So there's still errors, but I moved it to a text. Now, that means that when you highlight this information, it's not going to sum it for you. It's just going to take that as text. Again, you kind of can look down the way. Sometimes things can be summed up. Sometimes it's no point. Your AAI, which is your DFAS station that you're looking at, whether 387700 is Deems, your OE. Again, it kind of plugs in on most of this. The ones that are important are the dollar amounts. So when you start getting into available authority, you want to change those to currency. And so I just come down here and just click on all these and change them to currency. And again, you won't have to do this every time, but it's just kind of a good picture of what this looks like. And the reason why you want it as currency is because when it sums the data, if you do any division or calculated columns, it's going to give you the exact outcome up to like 10 or 11 decimal places. But if you put it as a currency, then it's only going to give you the 2 decimals. So you can see it pop out here where it's 2 decimals. versus if you just use the decimal number, it's going to only give you 1 if necessary. But because all of these are in a currency, I'm going to pull these into a currency. Don't worry about the ones that say null. That is Power BI just acknowledging that there's no data in that cell. Kind of see some of these. The 16.2 goes to 1620. And again, it's just an easier way to clean your data so that way everything comes out in the right formatting. There's a couple other tricks you can do here, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to keep it as is. If you can see your report time date is here. Again, you can adjust those. You can make it into something different, but for simplicity's sake, we're going to leave it at that. So we're going to click close and load at this point. So now it should come in a table. However, it will be a green table. If you notice, most of the time when you put tables in, if you copy and paste them in, they usually come in blue, and that is a uh, Excel telling you it's in table format. But if it's pulling it from Power BI or pulling it through Power Query, it's going to give you a green table. You can kind of see it's loading all the data. Again, I've got at least one error. I would encourage you guys to explore the errors. You can Google them, how to explore them, but take a look at them, see why it's giving you errors. Most of the time that I found with these things is you have something like this, where this line of business, again, it's always 103 with a bunch of zeros behind it, but it was probably set up as a number, and you got some NAs in here. Like here's a place where it's not. But that's why you get some of those errors. So now we've got this in here, and we've got a blank sheet because that's what we had before, but it's green and it has all that same data in there. So at this point, what I do is I go and I add in some lookup data. And the reason I do this is because I want my reports readable by other people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I've already got lists built out of my O bands that I'm going to use. So I'm going to copy and paste those in here. Oops, let's insert. Let's just name these O band and unit. All right. So again, these are all 22nd Air Force. I'm going to hit Control T. My table has headers. So then, there you go. That's what a normal table looks like. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm going to say, I'm going to do a VLookup so it returns back the unit information. So what does that look like? I'm going to come back to this table, come all the way down the end, and I'm going to come in here and type in unit. So that gives me another column of information, and it's going to then build all that, but there's no information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a VLookup. So to do that, I'm going to do equals VLookup. And then once it's kind of there, where it's showing that VLookup, I'm just going to hit tab because it has to be in all caps. So this is kind of your little array that tells you what it's looking for. So first it's going to ask, what's the lookup value? What's the table array that we're looking at? What column? And then what's the range lookup? All right, so I'm going to walk you through all those. First thing is lookup value. I'm going to come back here and go to OE. Now you have to click on the same line that you're working off of. So I was working on the second line, and I'll click on it. You know that it'll say the column header name. So that's my first lookup value. Now it's going to ask for the table array. So I'm going to come back to this table, and I'm going to select the entire table. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back and select my OE. Then I'm going to put a comma and select my entire table. And again, there's the array. and then I'm going to hit comma, and now it's going to ask for the column index. So this is where I've already looked up the OBAN, and I've said, hey, on this table, find the OBAN, and now you're going to return the column index of 2, which is the second column. If you have multiple OBANs, for example, I have 6234 under the 340th, and I have 6235 under UFT. UFT is technically under the 340th. So if I wanted to break this out further, I could go name it the 340th here, and then have another breakdown and list this as, say, trainers or pit training, and then the UFT would be for the students. So I could hit students there. And if I had another column of that and I would select 3, then it would return back what's in the third column. All right, then I'm gonna hit comma. Now there's 2 options here for this lookup. You can do an approximate match or an exact match. I usually do the 0, which is usually an exact match. 1 is the other option, which is an approximate match. What that's going to do is it's going to go down this list and it's going to look for an exact match that's exact with what's in there and the formatting. So again, it's going to look down, find that, and return back exactly what you want. If you do approximate, then it's going to come down, and once it gets to a point, so for example, it's going to come down here and say we've got 62B3. It's going to come down here and go through your 62s first, and once it gets to a B, it's going to find that, and if the next number, so say we were looking at B5, it's going to come down this list, it's going to find 62B4 and 62B6, and it's going to return back probably the first one that it finds, the B4, even though further down the list is the B5. So that's where the approximate match, it's going to go down the list, and once it's kind of recognizing characters, once it gets what is past that character, it's going to return back the first thing. Again, I generally use exact matches, and then that way it gives me a null error. So I'm going to end the parentheses, and I'm going to hit enter. It's going to take me back to that unit. And again, it returned back the unit that I wanted. And now it gives me this little box here, and I'm going to click it and overwrite all cells in this column with this formula. So there you go. It gives me all of the unit names. So what this does for me is now I'm going to go insert pivot table, and it's going to collect all that data, and I'm going to work on a new worksheet. And this gives me the ability now to see all of my stuff with that unit name. So I'm going to add in the unit and the rows, and then we're going to throw in some information really quickly, commitments, gross obligations, unobligated, so you can kind of see what the units are looking at. And then I'm going to, again, make that all dollar amounts, and bam. Now I can see the total availability and all the information. A couple other things I want to highlight is slicers. A great way to slice your information is to click on insert and go to a slicer here. And what that's going to allow you to do is pick any one of these columns. And so, for example, I'm going to pick the POA, period of availability. And what that's going to do is they can give me a little box of all of these period availabilities that I can adjust. And so for this, I'm going to adjust my box a little bit, and I'm going to add, yeah, that looks good with that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at FY24 data, and there you go. That's what we've got loaded, and our gross obligations, commitments, and unobligated balances. So right there, I can see exactly where the units are at and how much money they've got. I can also go look back just by clicking FY23 and seeing that. If I want to see all things prior, I simply hold Shift and I click on additional items, and again, Control if you want to take out individually different items. One quick thing with this is I usually have to click on it and go to size and properties, and then on the right, on positional layout, I'm sorry, under properties, click on don't move or size with cells. And what that does is when you adjust these things, the box is going to stay the same. It's not going to try to adjust with the cells. For example, if I had H and I extended it, if I didn't have that clicked, it would make the box a little bit wider. So again, that's how to use slicers, how to use VLookups, and how to basically create a new table. The one other thing I want to show you is when you're going to create a new table off the same information, do not go back to your source data. Simply create a copy of the tab you're on and put it on there, because every time you create a new table, you create a new cache of background information and it makes your file size grow rather quickly. So the more you can change your or copy your tabs, that'll keep your cache size under one cache. So again, now we're looking at, FY24 versus FY23 data. So that's how you can pull the stuff in. You can write a VLookup to add a naming convention, and how to pull that stuff in using Power Query. What this ultimately looks like, so here's my end product. I have different naming conventions, and I have the different units. I've separated the funding, whether it's discretionary or fenced. Again, that's based off of FY24, and we're in a CR right now, so that changes. I've highlighted my unit, 3/40th, so I can see commitment and obligations percentages. I can see our straight line because I've got that in there, so where we should be for the year. Again, we haven't received all of our O&M for the year, which is what I'm looking at right here. And yeah, like that just kind of shows me where everybody's at, and I can kind of see out of everybody's discretionary how much they've spent. For O&M, I've broken up into the different RCCCs and grouped them so I can see where everybody has spent their money for FY24. Again, I've got a little slicer. I can see how much is in GBC. I can see where all the units are loading their money. I can see who's breaking it out, who's not. Again, that's not, there's no pros or cons to any of that. It's just how they're doing it right now, and this gives me the ability to break things out and identify things. I can also look at reimbursables. I've got it set up to where it's color coded, so I know if they balance, if I've got my D2O balancing, and if I can do any payments. I've got some calculated columns, which you can Google that and find ways to do calculated columns, so I know how much is still billable, the balances, and D2O, what needs to happen. So it already gives me key factors on what I need to do. So, and again, here's all the different tables that I've added to that just to add to my my model, so I can kind of go through that. That's how you pull in data using Power Query. That's how you can gather all that information into an Excel file and use VLOOKUPs to find the information that you want, so it returns back in a file that's readable. So you can do some naming conventions, or you can change kind of what the data means. And what I mean by that is, for example, at my unit, I have multiple RCCCs, cost centers, that for the same unit. So for example, I'll have a headquarters RCCC that captures all the headquarter stuff, but then I'll have a special RCCC for the command staff, and that allows me to isolate the commander's travel, the commander's stuff, and something that's specifically designated for him. That's kind of also how we do our withhold. We'll have a separate RCCC, and then when someone says, when the commander says, "Hey, pay for this," my question is, where do you want that money to come from? And if he says my withhold, I'm pulling it from that RCCC and putting it into the other RCCC that is going to utilize those funds. So it's a bump up to their budget. But that's how you kind of look at it from an Excel perspective. Next, we're going to look at Power BI, which is a little bit more intense. So again, make sure you like and subscribe, and put a comment below if this was kind of helpful. Again, it's a quick down and dirty version of how to do that in Excel. Thanks. See you next time.